Hello, and welcome to the 2024 proposed hunting season presentation for the Cody Biologist District. The Cody Biologist District encompasses the northwest portion of Wyoming. Today, we're going to be talking about these herds throughout the district, from pronghorn to mountain goats. We'll start with pronghorn today. And we'll start with the Badger Basin pronghorn herd, which is actually one of the smallest herds in Wyoming. The Badger Basin antelope herd is within the management objective, which is a 3-year trend count. We have seen some low fawn ratios over the last couple of years, and buck ratios are maintaining in the 30s. Within this herd, we do have some issues with pronghorn that are causing some damage issues on irrigated and private land. And because of that, we're going to be focusing more harvest on those areas. Here you can see the proposal for this year. The format for these proposals will be the same throughout, with blue underlined being additions to seasons from last year, and the red crossouts being removals from last year's seasons. So as you can see, we are proposing a new license, the 80 Type 2, which again will help focus some harvest on those areas where we're having issues east of Highway 120. And then splitting out seasons for the Type 6 or the doe fawn license, having 75 of those licenses from September 20th to November 15th being doe or fawn valid on private land throughout the entire unit, whereas the Type 7 is trying to, again, focus harvest in those areas east of 120 where we're having some issues on private land and with damage on irrigated meadows and other irrigated lands. Let's move on to deer within the Cody district. Within the Cody district, there are 2 deer herds, and today we're going to start with the Upper Shoshone deer herd. The Upper Shoshone deer herd has been below management objectives since about 2017, when we had a very difficult winter and we lost many of the deer in the herd. We have been growing this herd, though, over the last 7 years or so. Although we haven't reached management objective, we can see by harvest and by number of deer that we're seeing in the area that numbers are increasing. Overall, this herd does typically have what we consider on the lower end of good fawn ratios, with a 5-year average of about 63. Our buck numbers have increased actually since that 2017 time period, when we were running at kind of a mid to upper teens buck ratio, and now we see a buck ratio of mid-20s. This is something that we will need to keep an eye on as we move forward, because there are concerns with chronic wasting disease, and one of those management objectives for maintaining low prevalence of chronic wasting disease is maintaining a lower buck ratio, so we will be watching that into the future. Within that harvest, we have seen a good age class of harvest. You can see here in this graph here, the ages down here on the bottom, or on the bottom of the graph, and the percent of the harvest up here on the vertical part of the axis. And so what you can see is that it is a nice bell curve here. Each of the years denoted by the different colors, moving left to right, 2021 to 2023. The middle part of our harvest is actually at that 3.5 to 4.5-year-old age class. And this data is all from tooth data, so that we collect teeth when we do field checks. And this data is from almost 200 different individuals this year, And as you can see, over the last 3 years, it's close to almost 500 different individuals. So it's really good data to show us kind of what the harvest looks like across the board. Very small percentage of young bucks. This year, only about 16% were 1 or 2 year old deer, with 60% of our harvest in 2023 being 3 to 4 year old bucks, which is really a very good distribution of age for harvest in a general hunt. One thing that to note is that even though we are in that 3.5 to 4.5 year old age class, you can see here based on antler spread that typically we don't grow the real giant mule deer that some folks are expecting, and that has a lot to do with feed availability, the amount of energy that these bucks have to expend just to migrate across some of the most rugged country in the lower 48. And so what you can see here is that even at a 3.5 and 4.5, our average width, our average spread on the antlers is only about between 17 and 20 inches, year to year. And so really, we don't get into those really larger, more representative mule deer of big spreads until much later. And then we start to actually typically see a decline after 5.5 to 6.5. And this is all average, of course. So there is some spread there just based on different individuals. But overall, we don't grow the largest mule deer in Wyoming by any means. As I had mentioned, chronic wasting disease is becoming a more prevalent issue for us with the upper Shoshone mule deer herd. We've seen an increase overall over the last 7 years from 5% to 14%, and now 21% with this most recent data collection year. And so this is something that kind of is at the forefront of our management challenge for this particular herd. And we do see this once we dig into the data and we start looking at where these positive chronic wasting disease animals come from. We are seeing this more driven by hunt areas 112 and 113. And there are many reasons for this and things that we've started to look at. Within the South Fork of the Shoshone, where the hunt areas 112 and 113 are, winter range seems to be constricted due to development, and animals are being pushed into kind of smaller areas, more densely populated areas because of that. And so that in itself can cause chronic wasting disease prevalence to increase. In addition, we've seen a large number of whitetails over the last 7 years in the South Fork area. And we've responded with licenses for those whitetails. But in some cases, there are properties that it is more difficult to gain access to harvest those whitetails. And so we have a very large population of whitetails, which, because of their life history, the way they live, can actually cause those rates to increase because they are living around each other all year round. They don't migrate. They live in the same areas, and they can cause chronic wasting disease to become an issue within those populations. Once mule deer then migrate back into these areas and start to mix and mingle with these whitetails in the same areas, that's when we can see mule deer become impacted by the numbers of whitetail and by the whitetail prevalence rates in these areas. If we take a quick look here at just what it looks like between the North Fork and the South Fork as far as prevalence, we can see an obvious increase in the South Fork versus a much slower or even kind of a stagnant prevalence in the North Fork here. This is striking and something that we will be trying to continue to address into the future. In the Upper Shoshone, we have seen this increase, and we've been trying to implement different management actions, and you can see those all listed here. Trying to, one, decrease overall buck ratios, keep those lower, as well as harvest bucks later in the season. And then again, trying to focus harvest on both whitetail and those resident mule deer in the areas where we started to see what we would call a hot spot. We've conducted public meetings and tried to make sure everybody understands what's coming, and unfortunately, we have, as of yet, been able to kind of decrease or even slow down that spread at this point. One other thing about the Upper Shoshone mule deer herd is that we are part of what is called the focal deer herd study for Wyoming, which is 5 different herds across the state that are doing focused collar studies that allow us to understand movements better, but also allows us to understand survival for these different herds. And as I mentioned already, that we see kind of low fawn ratios during the winter when we are counting, and you can see that reflected here. Overall survival for does is about 74%, which is on the lower end of survival for does in Wyoming. You can see the breakout there of the different major types of mortalities for those for doe mule deer. Buck survival overall, again, 62%. We do have a harvest rate, a fairly high harvest rate in the 20s for those animals. And then our CWD mortality rate, you can see there, follows pretty close to what we're seeing overall in the herd. And fawn survival at 58%. So you start with low numbers of fawns, and then only 58% are surviving. That just makes for fewer coming into the population, and so you can see why it's can be difficult for us to grow deer numbers here. So with all the information that we've been collecting over the last year from harvest and classification data, chronic wasting disease data, you can see here some of the areas that we're going to be looking at for 2024 seasons, with continued focus on whitetail population control, with licenses available within the South Fork. We'll be working to increase the availability of places to hunt whitetail on the South Fork, and hopefully we can gain some partnerships in that this year. We will be readjusting some of those licenses just to match demand. We've had quite a few licenses available, and we have yet to sell out, and so we're readjusting those to a more reasonable level. And moving into the future, as I mentioned with chronic wasting disease, we've got to constantly be reassessing and assessing our mule deer buck ratios, and we could see changes into the future. So here you can see hunt areas 110 through 115 with just a very minor changes in numbers. Again, this is to adjust to actual numbers of people that are buying licenses. Currently, we have not sold over 300 whitetail licenses for the South Fork, and the same for these 113 type 7s. We have yet to sell over 100, so we're proposing a readjustment of those. Let's move on now to the second deer herd that is within the Cody district, which is the Clarks Fork deer herd. The Clarks Fork deer herd encompasses hunt areas 105, 106, and 109. And currently, as you can see there on the population graph there, we are slightly below objective, but we have been climbing, as you can see, from difficult winters that we had in 17-18 and slow responses because of very similar issues with fawn ratios in the Clarks Fork as we have in the Upper Shoshone. Now that population estimate we're very confident in. feel like we've got great data because of two independent abundance estimates. One from trail cameras on winter range that allowed us to gain insight into population numbers on winter range. And then also this year we flew what's called a siteability flight, which gives us information again on population numbers based on the numbers of animals that we saw, the type of habitat they were in, and things like that. So, very confident in that estimate of about 3,800 animals in this population. Buck ratio is a bit higher than we see right now in the Upper Shoshone, a little bit higher than the average. And if you remember, mentioned that buck ratios are one of the things for chronic wasting disease that we've got to kind of keep on top of. And so you're going to see a little bit of opening up of the end part of the season, which is typically when we would get our harvest on bucks for this particular herd. Right now, we don't feel like we've got as big of an issue with chronic wasting disease in this herd, but it's difficult to say because we do take much fewer samples in this herd. So the changes that we are proposing for the Clarks Fork mule deer herd include trying to protect resident mule deer in and around the sunlight habitat management area in Hunt Area 106. There's been discussion over the last several years that we may be getting a little bit more harvest on those residents than we would want. The other changes that we're looking at are to deal with damage from resident deer in Hunt Area 105, as well as, again, try to keep numbers at a lower density for those resident deer and in the front of chronic wasting disease. And then also overall allow for increased harvest on bucks in both of these to try to decrease overall buck ratios, again, in light of chronic wasting disease in the area. And of course, continue pressure on whitetail within this area in the name of chronic wasting disease and trying to keep that prevalence down. So what you'll see in proposals for Clarks Fork is within the general license for 105, running that through the 27th of October, so adding days onto the end of the season. And for a migratory hunt like this, adding days onto the season will result in an increase in harvest because as we move in farther into the migration season, more and more bucks become available for harvest, and so we expect to see an increase in harvest this year from that increase in days. Also, just a change in that 105 and trying to protect those a majority of those migrating mule deer, but also allow for harvest in these areas where we are having some issues and some damage on irrigated land within 105, and then as I mentioned with the whitetail, making sure that that anyone that wants to harvest whitetail during that time can do so, either sex, during that general season. And then as you see in 105, the November 1st to the November 5th portion, it's again trying to follow kind of that migration pattern. There are going to be animals available off forest during that time period, and then any white-tailed deer that are in the entire area will be available. And then in 106, what we're doing here again is, as I mentioned, trying to protect resident deer in and around the sunlight area and those areas in the front country that may have been receiving more pressure over the last several years. And so the first portion of that general season, changing that to wilderness areas only, and of course any whitetail in the entire area. And then the 106 regular season, open in the entire season, again, adding days onto the end, which we would expect to allow for more harvest of bucks in 106. And then what you see down there in 109 is an addition of a whitetail buck license, which will be the first year for that if approved, running November 1st through December 15th, and it would be for any whitetail deer, so bucks included. For non-residents, you can see that Region F, we're making no proposed changes to the non-resident quota of 550. Let's move on to elk now. There are two herds that we're going to be talking about today, and we're going to start with the Clarks Fork elk herd, and then we're going to move on then to the Cody elk herd. We'll start with the Clarks Fork elk herd, and this year we are proposing some major changes within this herd. And that major change really is to realign hunt areas with um, our management objectives for different portions of the herd and also movements that have changed over the last several years. And in the future, you will see a proposal for new objective levels for each of these hunt areas that we are proposing here today. And so be looking for that this summer. So let's start with one portion of the proposal that we are proposing, which is to remove Hunt Area 53. Now, Hunt Area 53 is a relatively small hunt area, and because of that, we can see elk moving in and out of this area pretty readily. And so in the past, we have seen times when um, the herd would move out of there either due to weather or pressure from hunters or even pressure from predators. And so with that, it was really hit or miss on whether the elk would be in there. Also, the demand for this license has been pretty low, with successful draw rates of the Type 1 license being from 16 to 26%, and typically the Type 2 license was at about 100%. And so that led us to start thinking about maybe reconfiguring these hunt areas to allow for just a better opportunity for harvest in that area, coupled with another area. As far as splitting that Hunt Area 53, as you can see here, with the split now coming along the divide where the Dead Indian and Elk Creek drainages would now be included in 51, we felt like that would give us more opportunity for licenses in Hunt Area 51 as well as more areas to hunt. And then the same for 54, allowing some of that, but also allowing for better management of these elk that are kind of living in this front country, that are what we would consider our migratory elk, elk that we want to see good quality in and we want to see sustained into the future. With that said, the splitting off of this new hunt area from 54 was because of a group of elk on this Heart Mountain area here that 10 to 15 years ago, elk would come over to this Heart Mountain area, maybe spend a month or two over here for winter, but then in the summer and spring and summer and into the fall would be over in more of our remote or areas where there were not as many people or issues with elk causing damage. Well, what we've seen over the last 10 or 15 years is this portion of the population actually staying on Heart Mountain. We're counting as many as 400 to 500 elk on Heart Mountain year round. Just over 2023, Wyoming Game and Fish personnel probably spent over 200 to 250 hours dealing with the elk because they don't just stay on Hart Mountain, they're heading east and getting into agricultural situations with irrigated meadows and crops. And so, because of that, this portion of the herd now becomes something that we want to manage differently than the elk on this side and what would be now considered 54 and 51. These are the migrating elk, the elk that we want to continue to have good quality in, sustain numbers in, versus in Hunter Area 65, where we really want to decrease those numbers because of the amount of damage that they are causing, the amount of hours that they're causing Wyoming Game and Fish to spend dealing with the problems that they are causing. So this group has become what we would consider problem elk. Now, there is still some interchange, especially with bulls, because when you get 400 cows over here, you're going to have some movement of bulls into this particular area. But again, the majority of the elk that are in Hart Mountain are living there year round, and we just don't see the movement back and forth like we did 10 to 15 years ago. And those are the real reasons for why this change is occurring so that we can better manage um, those elk over here versus the elk on Hart Mountain. So, with that, the proposed change for this year would be to have this new Area 51. And with that, because it would be increasing the amount of area available for hunters as well as the number of elk that would be available, we are proposing an increase of 20 for the Type 1 and an increase of 5 for the Type 9. Moving on to Hunt Area 54, you can see again an increase in licenses because of the increase in area and potential for more elk in that particular portion of 54 that's taking over 53. So you see an increase of 15 licenses there. You'll also probably note that for those licenses, instead of running all the way to the end of November, we're now proposing a decrease to the 31st of October. That is because of the potential for an increase in harvest of elk that are migrating through 51 and into 54, protecting kind of a cohort of elk that can become more vulnerable as time progresses into November. And so, to make up for that, what we're proposing also is this establishment of a late season license within Hunt Area 54 of 10 licenses that would run that month of November. Again, cutting down pressure on some of the migrating elk that we do have coming across 51 into 54, and elk that become more vulnerable as that time progresses in November. If we go back up to the 54 Type 1, you'll see that because of the movement that we sometimes have between bulls, anyways, in that 54 country over to Hart Mountain, with the number of cows that we have over there, we are allowing this license, the Type 1, to also be, or we're proposing to allow this license to be valid in 65 as well. And so if folks have some permission over there, can gain access, they've got the ability to hunt both sides in case there are bulls that are moving across 54 and not available in 54 but available in 65. With this readjustment of 54, we're also proposing some differences with those cow licenses. Again, we can manage this portion of the herd a little bit differently than we have in the past. This portion of the herd we want to sustain, at least sustain numbers, and in some cases allow numbers to increase. And so you see a readjustment of both license numbers and then where those licenses are available. The Type 6 being available across the entire unit, and the Type 7 being focused on some of the issues that we do have on North Fork with some damage issues and concerns, as well as in the northern part of the unit up by the Clark area. Now, 65 being a new hunt area, proposed new hunt area, all these would be obviously new. And we're actually going to start with the type 1 down here, which would have an archery portion September 1st through the 30th. That season would run the 1st through the 31st with a quota of 25 any elk. Now, again, remembering the objective for Hunt Area 65, which is to decrease elk because of the damage these elk are causing and the issues that they are causing. You're going to see 3 different cow-calf licenses. A Type 4 license, which is a full-price cow license that would run from August 15th through December 21st, so the entire fall season. That would be 100 licenses. And then starting on that August 15th as well, having a Type 6 that ran through the first part of the fall would be 150 licenses, August 15th through October 31st. And then a Type 7 that would run from the 1st of November through December 21st, 250 licenses. Trying to get people out during their time periods so that folks don't wait till the very end and then decide not to go out. And so trying again to decrease overall number of elk. Now, in addition, looking at a proposed general antlerless elk only season from January 1st through the 15th in all of Hunt Area 65. Again, the objective for Hunt Area 65 and the Heart Mountain elk is to decrease those numbers, to decrease interactions with croplands, with private land, and with fences and other things that they are causing problems with. Moving on from the Clark's Fork elk, we'll move into the Cody elk, which has very few changes compared to the Clark's Fork elk. Now, the Cody elk herd is really at objective, and we use a 3-year trend average for that. So what that means is we go out, we do our normal counts, we add up the total number of elk that we see in a particular year, we add it to the 2 previous years, and we divide by 3. That gives us a trend. Now, that's really important when we start to look at just total numbers of cows that we're counting. What we've seen in this herd here of recent is a flux of animals moving in and out of this population. As you can see here in 2023, we counted almost 4,600 elk. We believe that there's a lot of movement from the Jackson area, from the DuBois area, that these elk are bouncing back and forth, and that's really the only explanation to go from 2,500 elk in one year to 4,500 elk. And so the trend kind of smooths that out. And these numbers over here on the left are actually the trend objective numbers that we currently have for these different what are called count blocks. So when we talk about objectives, we're looking at hunt areas 55 and 56 together, 58 and 59 together, 61 by itself, and hunt area 66 is actually one of those areas where we're trying to keep elk separated from cattle and from agriculture. And so we have an objective of 0 out there, which we counted about 150 elk in hunt area 66 this year. Overall, calf ratios have been pretty steady between 19 and 21 over the last several years. So what you can see from here, these are our actual trend numbers for this year, which would be the total number plus the previous 2 years' numbers and taking an average, and that's total number of elk, not just cows. In this herd unit, we've had really good harvest success across the unit, a 32% on average general season success rate with hunters, which is fairly high for a general season for elk. Bull license success, those limited quota licenses at about 70% average. That's really being driven by that hunt area 61. And then cow license success of about 54% on average across all the different hunt areas. So very good opportunity for elk hunting within the Cody elk herd currently. So overall, because we are increasing and getting to the top of our objective levels, we're going to continue to use cow licenses to decrease overall numbers. So what you're going to see in the Cody elk herd is a little bit more opportunity for some bulls, especially in Hunter Area 55, in the way not only with total licenses in 55, but also the way that we're proposing some changes to the 56 Type 1 license. And then also you'll see additional licenses for cows in the unit. So what this looks like, if we take the different hunt blocks, so we start in 55 and 56 over here, 55, 56, looking at the Type 1, an additional 10 licenses for the any elk season. And then the change that I mentioned with 56, with that Type 1 license, in the past we've typically had that in just 56, and we'd run that later into December in order to allow elk that winter in the park and in the higher areas of 55 to actually move into 56. As of recently, we haven't seen that movement as much. We haven't seen the weather really driving them into 56. And so we believe that there's extra opportunity to be had within 55 for this late season license. With that, because we are proposing to open up 55, there's really no reason to run that license into December. And so we're proposing to decrease the days to November 30th to align with the other late season licenses in the area. And again, as I said, Hunter Area 56, an increase of 50 licenses. And then in the Hunt Area 56 Type 7, splitting that out really into some early season opportunity for cows in the area where we are having some issues with cow elk on irrigated meadows and things, to allow for an early portion of the season within the North Fork drainage, and really focusing attention on those areas where we've had some resident elk kind of set up shop and start to cause some problems on private land off of any of the public land that we have. And so you see that proposal there. And then a second portion of the season, which would open it up to the entirety of 56 off of National Forest. Again, allowing us to deal with some of the issues we've had with our resident populations growing in these areas. If we look at 58 and 59, really again just a slight change in cow licenses over here, and then increasing the number of days within the Type 1 to match up kind of along the entire frontier of late season licenses, even up into the Clarks Fork with the proposed 54 Type 1 license or Type 3 license, late season bull license that would allow harvest in that November time frame. And in 59, another increase to try to deal with the increasing populations that are almost over objective in those areas. No changes in our thoroughfare backcountry hunt proposed for this year. And then finally, last two here in 61, no changes this year. We really feel like we've been harvesting at a good rate in there and doing our best to get a good harvest on the biggest portion of the herd unit. Numbers is in 61. And you can see that here in the total number of cow harvests that we've had, especially since numbers have been increasing since 2018-19. And so we feel like the seasons that are out there, we're going to kind of stick with them and see if we can't maintain some decent harvest out there in that area. And in Hunter Area 66, just increasing a bit of opportunity on that Type 6 license, again, to try to maintain numbers at a low level in this hunt area where we're trying to maintain minimal numbers of elk because of the potential for disease as well as damage issues. Now we're going to move on to our high mountain big game, bighorn sheep and mountain goats. We'll start with the Absaroka bighorn sheep herd, which encompasses hunt areas 1 through 5. Overall, we seem to be doing pretty well in hunt areas 1, 2, and 5. However, in hunt areas 3 and 4, we do have some concerns based on some of the data that we've been collecting through harvest as well as through flights. You can see here, hunt area 1, although shows a lower success rate, there were opportunities for rams. We know that um, a couple of the folks out there decided not to take a ram this year. But seeing really good numbers of rams in that hunt area 1 and especially hunt area 2. See the low success there in hunt areas 3 and 4. And then again, the really high success, kind of a bright light for sheep hunting in the Absarokas with a 97% success rate with a good average age as well. As I mentioned, hunt area 3 and 4 were definitely concerning for us based on not only harvest statistics, but just general comments from hunters and what we were hearing from folks in the field and kind of what we've been seeing over the last several years. So in March of 2024, we did an intensive flight looking at hunt areas 3 and 4, and you can see the results of that here on this slide with over 7 hours of flight in hunt area 3. During that time, we only counted 41 greater than 3/4 curl rams in that hunt area, and we felt like we covered the area pretty well. And comparison to another intensive flight in 2020 shows that we're about half the number of adult mature rams that we had seen in that time period. And then hunt area 4, same kind of story, 4 hours of flight, and only seeing 19 of those really mature rams from the helicopter during that time. If we start to look not only at, kind of what we're seeing with our rams, if we look at the days to harvest that you see over there on the right-hand side, definitely an increase of days to harvest. We've seen, the lower success rates in the 70s for a few years in both of these hunt areas with some variability. But days to harvest does give us an indication of how easy or difficult it is to find rams in this area. So when we start to think that, it all ties back to really what young are being produced. And so if we look over time at lamb ratios, starting in hunt area 3, we can see that over the last 10 years or so, there's been a lot of variability. We've hit some lows, and so a lot of variability. And compared to, kind of those early years, 83 to 94, we are running a little bit lower on average for those lamb ratios. In addition to this, obviously, disease is a big issue for bighorn sheep in the realm of pneumonia and disease outbreaks. And so we know that within both of these hunt areas, we do have the bacteria that causes that disease and something of concern. And so even with some higher lamb ratios as of recent, it's unknown how many of those are actually surviving into adulthood because of that. If we look at hunt area 4, things don't seem as dire, as difficult for hunt area 4. We've seen a nice increase over the last several years of those lamb ratios, as you can see on this graph. Again, with an increase, especially over the last 5 years of those lamb ratios. So that's very encouraging and something that bodes well for the future. Again, not much of a difference in averages, though, as you can see compared to the kind of early years in 83 to 94 there. Same average, which is nice to see. So I feel that like Hunter area 4 is got the potential to bounce back. Again, the unknown is what impact is pneumonia and disease having on these sheep, and how many of those young are actually surviving into adulthood. The key to this is that we are seeing lower numbers overall. We've seen low success, hunter comments, and increasing days to harvest, all indicating that we should be rather conservative moving forward. And so you'll see that in the proposals this year. And with that, you can see kind of the result of those flights and all the information that we've collected in hunter areas 3 and 4 specifically, with a decrease of from 25 to 20 licenses in each. And then, as I mentioned, 5 having a high success, good age class, having an increase of licenses in that hunt area. Over here, you'll see just the different distribution of the licenses based on a 90-10 split that was enacted last year. So with these numbers that we're running, we're going to be changing those back and forth to match that 90-10 every other year. Now, finally, let's move on to the Beartooth Mountain Goat herd. This herd is what we consider at or below management objective, which is something that we've been trying to achieve over the last 5 to 7 years. 7 to 10 years ago, we were counting large numbers of mountain goats in the area, especially hunt area 3. And this was concerning because of the overlap with bighorn sheep, and especially in those high elevation winter ranges. Recent studies showed that there was overlap with between our goats and our bighorn sheep, and new research is continuing to show that bighorn sheep just typically are not going to want to be in places where the mountain goats are, and so we were seeing struggling bighorn sheep populations. And so the objective over the last several years has been to decrease that hunt area 3 portion of mountain goats in order to allow for more room for a bighorn sheep. And what we've seen in hunt area 1 and 2 over the last 7 years is increase in numbers, as well as good hunting opportunity for bighorn sheep in both hunt areas 1 and 2 of the bighorn sheep hunt areas. So you can see here that still overall success between the two hunt areas is fairly high at 79%, with hunt area 1 being a bit higher at 82% versus 74% in hunt area 3. And so 11 days per goat, that has increased, and that's being driven mainly by that hunt area 3 type 1 license. And we have increased our percent nannies again in hunt area 3 type 1, especially, and even type 2. But you can see here success over the last several years for both hunt areas 1 as well as hunt area 3. I will mention that the hunt area 3 type 2 restricted area that we created several years ago to deal with increasing mountain goat populations in the southern part of where we would like to see mountain goats has been fairly successful, with a 90% success rate for that hunt area 3-2 license. This again was created to try to curb the movement of mountain goats across the North Fork and into an area where we definitely do not want to see mountain goat populations establish and cause more issues for bighorn sheep south of the North Fork River in what is considered bighorn sheep hunt area 3. So this year we are happy with where numbers are at for mountain goats. And so we are going to back off again on the Type 1 license and offer 15 and propose to offer 15 licenses this year. You can see the resident and non-resident split there. No changes for the Type 2. As far as numbers, what we did do is make this also valid in our hunt area 5. Now, if you remember, a few years ago we created this hunt area 5 in order to deal with some numbers of goats we had seen in this area where we, again, do not want goat populations to establish. And so with the Hunt Area 3 Type 2 license, they've got the option of hunting the area that I outlined in a couple of slides previous of that restricted area or the entirety of Hunt Area 5. And that gives people a lot of different options and allows us, if we do find a goat, especially along this boundary here, allows the option to send a hunter in to go after a goat in an area where we'd rather not have them established. I really thank you for listening to this, but if you do have any additional questions, obviously I can't hit all the nuances and intricacies of decisions and proposals that we made. But if you have any additional questions, please feel free to call myself or Jordan, Travis, or Grant. Their numbers are here on the screen. Or of course, if you can't get a hold of us, feel free to call the Cody Regional Office and talk with Corey Klass or Dan Smith. If you have any comments or suggestions, we'd love to hear from you, but we have to do so in a written form. And so if you would visit us online there at that website there, or go to our main webpage and look for Get Involved, and then the public meeting tab. If you'd rather write comments and mail those in, you can see the address there that you need to mail those to. And all of those comments need to be submitted or received by 5 p.m. on March 29th. So again, if you got any questions, need clarity, give us a call. But if you have specific comments that you want us to consider in this season setting process, please go online and submit comments, or go online and print those comment forms off, or stop by any regional office and you can grab a comment form from them as well and get those sent in. Really appreciate you listening today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day or evening, whatever time of day you're at.